Welcome to G-Man Gaming and Reviews. So this is going to be our first episode of our podcast on gaming PCs. I'm here with my friend who is my resident PC tech expert. He puts together all my PCs. And the idea behind this podcast is basically to get an idea of gaming PCs for people who aren't PC enthusiasts. Like people who just want to learn the stuff about gaming PCs. Alright, so I'm going to start with the first topic and then my friend will go on. So the first topic is, what are some of the benefits of AMD over Intel and vice versa for gaming?
Well, that question can be put into two parts. First of all, are you talking about CPU or graphics card? So I'm just going to go with CPU first, okay?
Okay.
In terms of CPU, is that in general, Intel CPUs usually have more power than AMD CPUs. However, AMD CPUs are generally a bit cheaper. But then again, as you go towards higher generations of higher end CPUs, that difference in price and performance gets smaller and smaller as you go more high end. That's the thing with CPUs. So it will be up to you whether or not you want to go with Intel or AMD, depending on your budget, or depending on what kind of power supply you have, because in general nowadays Intel consume a bit more power than AMD, but that's just for some models. So you when you decide on which CPU you want to use, you might want to look into how much power that CPU draws and what kind of power supply you have. That's for CPUs. And in terms of graphics cards, Intel again has more grunt. Intel graphics card in general has more grunt than AMD CPUs, but then again that still depends on the GPU. So graphics processing unit. So for example, an Intel AMD 6800 XT is going to be better than an Intel RTX 2060, but in at the same level, if the two graphics are at the same level, Intel has are more powerful in terms of processing power, but they are also more expensive. Again, you want to have a look at what your budget is and what's power supply you want to use in order to decide which one is best for you. However, one thing you can be rest assured is that Intel CPUs and AMD GPUs and vice versa will work great together.
Okay, so you don't really have to pick between having an AMD CPU and an AMD GPU. For those of you who don't know, GPU refers to the graphics card itself, and CPU is like the brain of the computer. Yeah,
so GPU is an acronym for graphics processing unit. So which is the graphics card, basically.
Yes, that's just another way of saying graphics card when people say GPU. The CPU is like the actual brain of the computer itself.
Yes.
So, to my understanding, though, AMD processors tend to have more cores. Is that correct?
Yes. For example, I'm just going to use the AMD, the Intel 9700K and the AMD 3700X Ryzen's 3700X as an example. They're comparable CPUs, but the AMD one I think has 12 cores and 24 threads, and whereas the Intel one has 8 cores and 8 threads. But therefore, like in this case, when it comes to overclocking or single core performance, Intel will top AMD. But as you go towards higher resolutions, that advantage decreases.
Yes, so in other words, AMD GPUs and stuff seem to be more optimized for gaming when you're talking about like the lower budgets.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So basically the way to think about it is like back in the day, computers used to have single cores, right? So if you're running a lot of if you're using a computer for work, and you've got like a lot of programs open, say Word, Excel, and all of this stuff, an Intel CPU may be better. Whereas if you're focusing on gaming, then an AMD CPU may be better. But that being said, as you go up in performance, it sort of becomes
obsolete.
Yeah,
Then you'll be just looking at the cost and what kind of power supply. Oh, and I have to make a correction. Earlier I said the 3700X has I think did I say 8 cores and 16 threads?
I don't remember.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, if I said that, then that's correct. So 8 cores, whereas the Intel 9700K has 8 cores and 8 threads. But so.
Cool. All right, cool. All right, the next question was, what's the minimum amount of RAM you should have for a gaming PC?
Normally I would go for 8, but nowadays, if you want to play games and have programs like Chrome or something open at the background, I'll suggest 16, which is at the moment is the sweet spot at the moment. But as when more programs come out, you might want to have more programs at the background and everything. You might want to go to 32 just to be safe. But if you just run one game at a time, with no background application or anything, then 8 gigs should be enough. But if you want to say play a game, then at the background you want to have YouTube open to listen to music, then I would suggest something like 16 gigs.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you really want to be safe, then I'll suggest 32. 64 is way too much. You're, in my opinion, you'll just be wasting your money. But to each to its own.
Okay. Cool. So, is it worth running 2 graphics cards in like 10? So just for those people who don't know, you've got things like Crossfire and SLI that allow you to run 2 graphics cards in the same machine. So is it worth it?
Okay, I'm just going to add something to what you just said first. So basically nowadays, so SLI is specific to Intel, and Crossfire is for AMD GPUs. So you can run up to 3 or sometimes even 4 graphics cards at the same time. But in my opinion, I wouldn't do it. I personally wouldn't do it. Because number one, each graphics card you add, you're probably going to get about 80% of the performance of the addition of the graphics card. So, for example, if you have one graphics card and the second one you add is going to be working at 80% of its performance. So that's only 180% rather than 200%, and so on. And also the heat that's produced from those. Having too many graphics cards will also affect the airflow or cooling in the unit. So basically, you have all the heat that's generated, which will maybe heat up the CPU or your hard drive and everything, which will actually slow down your computer. That's in my experience only. So I wouldn't recommend it. So if you want to use 2 graphics cards, I would just say use a more powerful graphics card rather than 2 or 3.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because you would have to take into account like
the
heat and considerably more cooling than
and you won't get the full performance of the additional graphics card. And also, for sometimes computers may require 2 graphics cards of the same type. In order to run.
So you can't just take 2 separate graphics cards and just put them.
No, you have AMD and Intel has came up with a list of what graphics card can be used in conjunction with each other. So you need to find that out before you run 2 graphics cards because otherwise both graphics cards might be disabled.
Okay, alright, that makes sense. The next topic was, should you upgrade for Windows 11? Is there any benefit for a gamer upgrading to Windows 11?
I personally haven't upgraded, but I've done it once at some point in time. In my experience, from what I heard, is that Windows 11 does speed up some of the tasks for some of the processing powers and everything, but at the same time, I also heard it's not 100% compatible with AMD CPUs. There is some issue there. So, and also from what I know, my experience is that they kind of disable the drag and drop function.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So at this stage, unless they come up with more patches, I would actually suggest holding on to personally, because everyone's different. So me personally, I would hold on to upgrading to Windows 11. Plus, like Microsoft actually has this barrier to upgrading to Windows 11. So first of all, your machine can't be too old. So it needs to have TPM, trusted platforming module. I think it's the TPM, and also you need secure boot, which not every computer, which not every motherboard has.
What's TPM?
Trusted platform computing.
What does it do?
It's sort of like I think
So it's sort of like for verification purposes.
Yeah,
or something
verification
like
purposes. Yeah,
Okay.
it's designed to provide hardware basic security.
All right, fair enough. So I think that's pretty normal with the operating systems. That normally it's not a good idea to upgrade to them because of all the bugs normally, and they fix them later.
Yeah, so I mean, I liked it what they did from Windows 7 to Windows 7 and Windows 8 to Windows 10. That was a good one. But Windows 11, I'm just gonna reserve my judgment for the time being.
Fair enough. So, for those of you who don't know, there's two types of hard drives. There's the old hard drives, and there's the SSD. So, my friend, what is SSD? What are the benefits of it? How's it different from a regular hard drive?
So, so with a regular hard drive, you have a disk spinning inside the hard drive. You read from the disk. Whereas SSDs, it's just a circuit board. So because there's no spinning parts. It's faster than a normal hard drive. The benefits of it, well, first of all, it's been faster. So if you ever play a game off an SSD, the loading time is going to be way quicker. So maps will load quicker. So all the hardware-based loading will become quicker. The disadvantage of an SSD, I guess, is that first of all, data. If you erase data from an SSD, it's usually not recoverable.
Okay.
Second of all, is that SSDs normally has a shorter lifespan than what do you call it, a normal hard drive. So I think you can write in write in. So if you format the SSD, then you write data in. You can do it about 500 to 700 times.
Oh, okay.
Before the SSD becomes, starts to fall apart. So whereas for a normal hard drive, if you want your data to be recoverable, you'll store it in a normal hard drive, even though it's a little bit slower. But if you just do it for gaming, then I guess SSD is the way to go.
So those of you who don't know, they're actually talking about how SSD prices are expected to fall. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, because well, it depends on the type of SSD, I guess. They rise and fall, all the time. So if you're talking to a specific, I wouldn't be surprised if they rise or they fall, or if they fall. I mean, 2 years ago when I bought a Samsung EVO 970 Plus, it's about 500 gigs. It was about $80 Australian. Now it's about $100. So I'm not sure how much they will fall. I doubt they will fall to the price they were 2 years ago. But you never know.
Yep, cool. So for those of you who don't know, when they say SSD, there's two different types. So there's the one that fits directly on the motherboard, and then there's an actual drive. What's the difference between those two?
Well, depends. Okay, so what you call it is an M.2 interface. So basically, there are two types. The SATA type, which is pretty much the same as the one that's just connected to via SATA cable. That's the SATA interface. But the good thing about it is that it saves you space mostly. But however, if you put a SATA SSD onto your motherboard, usually one or more SATA sockets will be disabled because
channels.
Because the SSD shares a channel with them. Whereas the NVMe uses a different interface. It's faster, and it doesn't. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't use up any of the SATA the SATA channels. And also, I'll give you here's an analogy. A SATA SSD is it's like running an old Mercedes on a freeway. You can get to about 100 k's per an hour, whereas an NVMe type of interface will get you is like driving a race car on a race course. You get much faster data transfer rates.
Okay, that's an interesting analogy. So what's...
oh yeah, sorry.
Yep.
And NVMe normally doesn't take up any channels, but for those who any SATA channels, but still, I would suggest that before you put in a M2 type interface kind of SSD, you check your motherboard manual to make sure that the channels ain't taken up.
So you've got two different types. You've got NVMe and you've got M2.
That's right. Oh, no, NVMe and SATA.
NVMe and SATA. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So what's SSHD and what are its pros and cons compared to SSHD and regular hard drives?
So SSHD, that's so basically that's a hybrid between a normal hard drive and a SSD. So the advantage is that it's cheaper. And so
it's cheaper than so SSHD is cheaper than SSD.
That's right. And
okay.
And usually it has, I think, about 8 gigs of SSD incorporated. So, for example, if you have a 2 terabyte SSHD, you have about 8 gigs of SSD in it, and the rest is just normal hard drive. So basically, when you read data, the data transfers is read off the SSD part of the hard drive rather than the normal hard drive part of the data.
So does it like have some sort of buffer where it keeps like the stuff that is most likely to be accessed in the SSD?
Yes, that's right. So it's read off that. It's faster than a normal hard drive, but slower than a actual SSD.
Okay.
So, but the biggest advantage it has over an SSD is that it's cheaper, and its advantage over a normal hard drive is that it's faster than a normal hard drive, theoretically.
All right, cool. So the next question is somewhat related to the previous question about the two graphics card in TAM. So what is liquid cooling, and what's it used for, and what are its pros and cons, and how does it compare to regular cooling?
Okay, so regular cooling, you have air cooling. So basically, heat from maybe a CPU or a GPU gets transferred to a heatsink. Then you have a fan blowing on a heatsink to cool it down. So but with liquid cooling is that you have a water pump, and and still you have heat from the CPU or GPU transferring heat from that to like a water pump, water cooled heatsink, and which makes it in theory should make it cooler. The pros of it is that, like I said, it's more efficient than air cooling.
So it's better at actually cooling things down than air cooling is.
That's
okay.
right. But its cons is that one of the things is I haven't noticed it, but I have heard people saying that the liquid might leak.
Yeah.
And once the liquid leaks, it might short your entire system. So, if you're using a water cooling, then my suggestion is that you check your connections on a semi or regular basis to make sure nothing's leaking.
Okay.
Yeah, and also there's also the all-in-one kind of liquid coolers that you can buy in the shops.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so just make sure you connect it as instructed by the manuals those things come from, and make sure you apply a lot of thermal paste.
That's a good question. What is thermal paste and what's it used for?
So basically, thermal paste is the kind of paste or a coolant that you put between your CPU or GPU with the heatsink. With its heatsink, basically, it increases the heat conductivity of the conductivity between your CPU and the heatsink that's cooling it down. So you can have some good brands like Grizzly, Thermal Grizzly,
Arctic Silver.
Arctic Silver, yes, Arctic Silver, and you get some average brands like Cooler Master, maybe, and some no name brands. In my experience, I don't notice that much difference because I'm not a gamer, but from people who does gaming PC build from gamers. They apparently that does make some difference.
Okay, cool. All right. And the last question before we get you to talk about some PC builds that you're working on is, what is overclocking and what are its pros and cons, and where did it come from? Why do people do it?
Well, overclocking means you're making the chip run faster than its manufactured speed. So basically, so say for example, you get three types of not overclocking, but you have your base frequency, you have a turbo frequency, which is the manufactured manufacturer tuned overclocking. So basically, when you buy a CPU, you just have to look up its data. They will give you a turbo speed and an overclocking speed. That's your overclock limit. Turbo speed, usually it comes with the motherboard, so the motherboard will do the overclocking for you.
Okay.
Whereas actual overclocking, you have to do it. You have to tweak it in the BIOS. So basically, the pros is that it makes your processor faster, so you can it will be, I guess, as time, if you can't afford a new CPU, just overclock your current one and make it compatible with your other upgraded hardware. But the downside is that there is no, if you overclock, usually manufacturers don't cover overclock CPUs. So if you burn a CPU, overclocking will decrease the life of the CPU.
Oh, okay.
Because it's in a constant heat. So if you're gonna be overclocking, I suggest you go with water cooling. Maybe delid the CPU, because delid means you remove the the heatsink that came with the the CPU came with from the manufacturer, and you
would add a better one.
You add a better one, so maybe a copper one or something, and then you put put water cooling on it to make sure that the CPU, that the overclocking isn't doing too much damage to the CPU.
Is it much cheaper to invest in a better heatsink and water cooling to overclock a CPU than to just buy a new CPU?
Depends. Again, it depends on the price and how long you're planning to use the CPU. So if the CPU is relatively cheaper, and a new CPU will overclock higher. And when you buy a CPU, you gotta keep in mind about whether or not your motherboard is actually compatible with that new CPU.
Yes. Okay.
So, but with the overclocking, is that my suggestion is, unless you know what you're doing, don't overclock, because because if you haven't done proper cooling, or if the CPU gets too hot, your system will shut down by itself.
So, in theory, it should shut down before things start to burn.
That's right.
But that doesn't always happen.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. But then again, in most cases, depending on the game that you're playing, right? You have to you can look up, what's the minimum specs for that game and what's the recommended specs, and sometimes they have ultra specs. So depending on how many frames per second you want for the game, the refresh rate of the game, and the and the resolution you want to play it at, I would suggest go with what the game actually recommends.
Recommended specs.
Recommended specs, but sometimes you can, I guess.
So there seems to be almost like this sort of like car thing about it, where people love speccing up their PCs. Customizing them, and
that's right,
and that's the fun of it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like sort of trial and error
That's
where.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. It's more of an art than science. Like when people ask me, what PC should I get? And my first question is usually, what are you going to use it for? So the other day I was looking at through someone was asking me, I want a gaming PC for $300, which is a gaming PC by today's standards. It will be in your dreams to get one for $300.
Yeah.
But then I asked, okay, so what are you going to play? What are you planning to do with that gaming PC? What games are you trying to play? Because a gaming PC 10 years ago, or 10 or 15 years ago, is probably going to be worth $300 now. You can probably get that now. So my question is, what do you want to use it for? And he's told me a list of games he wants to play on. Like, well, you can just play it on a fourth gen, fourth gen Intel computer, and that you can probably get for like $300.
Oh, okay.
So, but more advanced games probably not. You'd be probably be looking at something more expensive. So when people say I want a gaming PC, the first thing I ask, what are you going to do with that PC? Like, what games do you want to play? Okay, and then I'll look up the specs of those games. And quote them accordingly. But if they just go, I want the best PC there is for $300. I mean, I'll probably just smile and nod politely.
Fair enough. All right. I think that was good. All right. So what we're going to do now is, do you have anything else you'd like to talk about?
Not right. Oh, just a few things.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just going to go through how to, if we've got time, how to, build your own game.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Okay. First of all, if you're on a budget, if you don't have a budget, then I'll say get the best specs that out there. But if you have a budget, first of all, know what you want to do. Like what games you want to play. Then you want to go a bit above, the minimum or the recommended specs of the games you want to play. So, for example, if a game requires an i7, a fourth gen computer to play, I would go with a 6th gen or even a 7th gen, because just in case you want to play more complicated games later. Second of all, make sure that everything is compatible, because a 4th gen motherboard will not hold a 6th gen CPU. So make sure everything is compatible. And then depending on your budget, I mean, I normally suggest my clients to go with at least an SSD for their operating system. But and then stick to, and then that's about everything. That's about everything I want to say.
Yeah, cool. So for me, if you SSDs are becoming a lot cheaper than they used to be. So there's kind of really no reason to
It depends on the SSD, actually.
Okay.
I mean, Samsung, I think it's getting more expensive, the Samsung EVOs, which from what I heard is one of the best brands out there. Samsung EVO. Yours is a Samsung EVO, by the way.
Nice.
Yep. Western Digitals and Cruise, other brands like Western Digital, that's pretty much the same. Then other brands like Crucial and stuff, I think they're actually getting a bit cheaper.
All right, cool.
Depending on it, it's a demand and supply kind of a issue.
So, what PCs are you currently building now?
I'm just getting rid of some of my old PCs. So I have i7 7700 with 32 gigs of RAM. What do you call it? GTX 980. That's I'm building. It's for mid to low range gamers. You can play most games on it anyway nowadays. But depending on what resolution you want to play it as, and how many frames per refresh rate, frames per second that you want to play, because what happens is that what I see most people do is I want to play this game at 150 frames per second,
yes.
At 144 hertz, but I only have $200. That's what. But the thing is, you can always increase the refresh rate at the same time by lowering the resolution. But if someone's going, I want to play this game at 4K with 150 frames per second and blah blah blah, all these demands, and tells me I have $300, then it's the nod and smile and nod politely response. That's what I'm saying. Like if you want to play games in high resolution with very high refresh rate, then you're looking at a lot of damage to your wallet. That's all I can say.
Fair enough. All right. Now, for those of you who don't know, as you probably would have just realised, my friend over here sells PCs. He also, if you're in Australia, Melbourne or just Australia?
In Melbourne.
If you're in Melbourne and you're interested in a custom PC, you can actually contact him, and he's got some pretty good prices. He can put them for you considerably cheaper than where you would get from like a major store. Where can they reach you?
I'm in the Clayton area, so southeast Melbourne area. So if you need so I can sell you the PCs I've already built, or I can help you build a customized PC yourself. So depending on what you want to do, again, if you're on a budget, you got to tell me what you want to do. But if not, sky's the limit. I can help you get the best parts for cheap with the cheapest price as well. Again, tell me what you want to do first.
Yeah, what email can they reach you on?
I'm at gamingonly102@gmail.com.
All right, this was the G-Man Gaming and Review podcast on gaming PCs. If you have any questions or anything else you'd like to cover in the next one, please let us know in the comments. And thank you all for joining.
Okay, thank you for having me, G-Man.
No worries. All right, bye.
Yep, bye.